This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Eric Hanchett, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not.
Today we're going to be diving into a little bit of a smorgasbord of struggle, as the French say, specifically having to do with junior devs. It seems that many people, when they get in the industry, seem to have the same concerns regarding, when they're getting their first job or as a junior dev, whether it's when to know to jump jobs, when to, how often to ask for help, if you should ask for help, what is a acceptable salary, and we've talked about that. But what sort of jumps should you get salary? We're gonna talk a little bit about everything from a junior dev perspective and the things that they're concerned about.
We've talked about before about how to get that first job a little bit. We've kind of touched upon that in previous episodes. But there's more than just being able to get the job. It's how do you act when you're on that first week, you're brand new, fresh dev, and you are looking to make an impact. Like how do you do that, and what are the struggles that you see? And I've been reading a lot of forums and Reddit and other places, and it feels like the struggle is real. Especially people seem to have a lot of regret when they get their first or second job and they find out that it's not exactly that they expect, or they think they feel stuck. So yeah, I'd like to dive into this and talk about those topics.
Yeah, I think one of the most unfortunate things that when you get you're in your first 1 year or 2 year at a job is there's a bit of a I'm scared to actually ask for help. I'm scared to take time away from the senior engineer or the tech lead, or the upper level developers who are sort of your peers, but you don't see them as your peers, and it almost requires a mentality shift at the same time.
I know and I think it's a balance too between being able to get help and then trying to figure out things yourself. I go back to my first internship in college. I got an intern at a Fortune 500 company, and I remember being in that internship and really feeling like, man, maybe I should just work really, really, really hard and not bother the senior devs at all. And I was thinking, and at first I was like, no, maybe I should bug them. And then at least the environment where I was in, it was really discouraged to bug your senior devs. And I don't know if it was because I was doing it too much or what it was, but I would literally come to a senior dev and I'd be like, hey, I'm stuck on this problem. And I felt like some resistance. They weren't sitting there and helping me and trying to figure out the problem. They were kind of like, well, I think it's this, but I'm not really sure. Maybe you should talk to this person. And then I would talk to this person, and that person would be like, well, I don't really have much confidence in this. Maybe you should talk to this person. And then there was like, well, this other person used to handle this all the time. Now, why can't you handle it? And you kind of feel bad. And I think the internship I was in was more cutthroat. I definitely felt like they weren't looking to nurture me and get me up to the speed. It was like, okay, you need to just grind. You need to just take this stuff home, spend 6 hours on it, and just figure it out yourself. I don't know. Have you been in a situation like that, Dylan?
I mean, I would say, like I've talked about this before, where I say like 7 out of 10 places you're gonna work are gonna suck, and so you have to kind of find that 3 out of 10. It's sort of there's lots of reasons to job hop around, but yeah, I have, unfortunately, and I've gone home and I've put the hours in. I've gone home and done all that. And to be quite frank, I think it's a good sign of what a terrible environment is. And like a lot of times, the reason that's happening is you have developers who are burnt out, management who's burnt out. It's more of a culture thing. And it's something I would try to avoid, because I communication is key for development. And any organization that thinks like, hey, 15 minutes of of a senior dev's time is worth 6 hours of a junior developer's time, is just they're not doing basic math at the end of the day. But yeah, I've done that where I've been the new guy on the block, and I've been struggling through, and like, oh hey, you're doing PHP, and then you're like, never did PHP a day in my life. So I start asking questions about that, and then you might get one answer, but then it becomes very apparent that your boss or your senior dev is like, listen, you had your one question, we're done. Like it's like bro. But yeah, it's again just not to me a sign of a bad workplace.
Yeah, I think I've been in organizations where they really value mentorship. They really value helping junior devs or interns level up. And then I've been in organizations where it's like throw you in the deep end, sink or swim. Yes, you can ask a senior dev or a team lead for help, but they're just going to kind of point you in the right direction, and you need to figure it out yourself. So, I mean, if you are one of those people that if you're a brand new dev, we all need quite a bit of help. You may have to just take whatever you're stuck on and work 10-hour days. The funny thing is, after that internship, one of the next jobs I had, I had transferred into development, and I decided that I thought maybe I was in the same work environment, even though it was a completely different company. So when I got stuck, I spent 10 hours just trying to figure it out myself. And I avoided asking my team lead questions other than just a few questions to get like point in the direction, because I was afraid if I would have taken up and monopolized his time for maybe an hour or two trying to help me, with the problem I was stuck on, that I would reflect on my review. So yeah, I guess it just depends. If you're in a great organization that they kind of value bringing up junior devs, then you're going to be in a much better time. And I would push back on that. Organizations that don't have that mentorship or don't have that mentality of helping junior devs is not necessarily a bad company. I mean, you can argue one way or another. It just maybe they value speed, and maybe they think their senior devs times are more important. And also, it could be not the organization's fault, but maybe the senior devs are too busy. Maybe they think they don't have time to mentor or help junior devs along the way. So I think it depends, and also it's all a lot about our personality too. Some organizations just click better than others.
Yeah, and I think one thing I should clear up is I'm not talking about mentoring. I think generally speaking, if you're a junior developer and you're expecting to get mentored by other developers, you're probably gonna be disappointed. Like you can ask questions and be pointed in a direction, but that's usually the extent of the mentoring. I'm more so talking about collaboration. I'm talking about working together as a team, and it's very common in those 7 out of 10, in my opinion, anyhow, to for the developers when they're burnt out to silo themselves as much as possible and be like, listen, I don't care if this guy sinks. I don't care if as long as I swim. That's basically it. And I think that's a telltale sign.
Yeah, I guess there's a difference between like mentoring, although there's organizations that value mentoring, and then just kind of helping someone that's having problems. Yeah, I could see that. Mentoring is maybe a step up from just helping someone out. You know what this reminds me of is the use of pair programming. I was in one job where we tried it for a couple of weeks, and it really worked well. I mean, I would sit there. We usually have one. So pair programming, for those who don't know, is a system where you have someone that drives, and then someone that kind of sits back and tells you about the code. So you might be the one typing, the other person is kind of explaining their thought process. So you kind of collaborate on bugs and problems and new features. And so this would be excellent for especially a junior dev when they're first starting out. If you can join an organization that does pair programming, then you are much better off, because just pair programming with a senior developer for a day or two or a week on a big feature is going to be it's going to level up your skills more than you sitting at home and trying to figure it out yourself for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, and sort of in a different direction, one of the things that to me kind of fall into that same I'm afraid to ask for help is a sort of one sort of a communication thing is pushing back and sort of speaking up to timelines. That is one of the more common things where I feel like you get that first job, you're in there for a year or 2 years, and then you're like, hey, when do you want it? Tomorrow? Sure. Yes, like or just sort of, or it's just silence. I don't know how many times I've ever actually seen a junior dev push back on a timeline.
Yeah, timelines are a sticky wicket for developers and especially for junior developers. I would say most junior developers don't even know how long something will take them, especially anything more complicated than, a quick update or a quick bug fix. And even a bug fix can end up taking 3, 4 times as long. I know some organizations, hopefully, and we talked a little bit about this in the Agile episode, is that the developers are responsible for estimating their, sometimes if you're using like a Jira system, their tickets, and they'll estimate each one out, and then they're held to those estimates. Although it's not always clear when you, even if you estimate tasks out, because you may be waiting for someone else to finish their task, so you may not be able to get your task done in a certain time, and then there's things called blockers. But yeah, if and it, probably you've had more experience in this than me. And actually, I did have some experience in a job ago where we just were arbitrarily given deadlines and there was no feedback from us. Maybe they talked to our boss. I don't even know, but we were just like, okay, April 15th, you need to get XYZ done. And having the courage to like be like, no, we can't get it done that time. That's really hard, especially for if you're a junior dev.
Yeah, and the scenario that I think is like the nightmare scenario for a junior dev is you're on your computer, you're working on whatever you want, and then you get this sort of knock, knock, knock on the corner of your desk, and it's it's not even your boss usually. It's usually like your boss's boss, and they're like, "Hey, I want this. How long?" Like that's essentially you get a 30-second pitch. This is what I want. How long? And then you have most people, I don't know, 5 days, right? Like, right, they'll just throw out a number. In that scenario or a similar scenario, I would encourage a lot of junior devs and just really developers in general. I think hopefully by the time you're a senior dev, you've sort of learned from these mistakes is to say, you know what, give me a moment. I'll come back to you in an hour. Let me think about it. Let me investigate. Do a little spike on it, and give a date range, right? So you oftentimes want to give date ranges or a time range with your estimate. You would say 5 to 10 days estimate if you wanted, with with just me dedicated to it. But that is something that I think is a very hard thing to do because you're so eager to please, right? You're like, you get that first job and you're like, dude, I'm just trying to keep this job, right? Like that's sort of the mentality.
You just explained the exact scenario from Office Space where they come over and like, can we get those TPS reports? And I know, Dylan, you're the one of the few developers in the world have not watched Office Space, which is a
No, I've
travesty.
watched I've
Oh,
watched Office Space.
okay. I thought for a second you
Yeah.
didn't.
No, no, no. But I mean, I've been in that situation 3 or 4 times where that you have someone come up to your desk that circumvents all process, right? Forget the scrum master, forget the business analyst, forget your boss. I'm coming to you. Uh, how long? And it's an intimidating thing to do, where you want to say you want to be like X, Y, and Z. But instead, you have to say question mark, question mark, question mark. Let me get back to you in an hour, and it's it's hard at times, and it's understandable. But these are the things that I think you can prepare yourself mentally for, as long as you know these scenarios happen and how to handle it. You can do quite well, and there's a lot of reasons why you would want to do that. The major reason is you'll oftentimes be more respected because if you say 5 days and realistically it's going to take 10 days, or they say, hey, we need it in 5 days, you don't say anything, they're going to think it's your fault and they're not going to be able to count on you in the future. However, if you're a little bit of a pain in the ass, which is sort of the mentality you have to have sometimes, they'll know that, when Dylan or Eric give an estimate, that they're going to hit it 9 times out of 10.
It depends on your organization. I've been in organizations that have said, like, typically, like, your project manager should be playing tackle football or blocking and tackling for you. Is that what they call it? So he should be blocking for you. And so if anybody from anywhere in the organization comes and talks to you, you should be like, hey, look, talk to my project manager. And if you don't have a project manager and you're in a small organization that doesn't have one, then you say, hey, look, talk to my supervisor. Then you kind of push that off from you to talk to them because they're the ones that are supposed to stop people from bugging you while you're working.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an excellent strategy as well, and correct, right? Like we have people, we have sort of dev support staff is what I call them. Although I imagine if my project manager or my scrum master sort of knew that's how I referred to them, they may not be up. I'm not sure if that's a derogatory term or not, but that's how I think of them. People who like, you know what I mean, like people who help me do my job in some form or fashion. But the that is another tactic to take, and another one where you sort of have to speak up and push back, right? You have to say, hey, let's I get you didn't want to talk to them, or you know what, but you politely say, hey, I don't know what we have on our, in our sprint. I don't know what's planned for next sprint. You should probably really talk to our project manager, our scrum master, whoever's handling that, and we can, they'll let us know if it's a priority, right? Because
Mhm.
it all comes back to priorities, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and granted, if the CEO of the company comes and talks to you, you may feel a little awkward, be like, hey, either pushing back on the estimate or telling you them to go to your boss instead. So you're like, but if some sales guy comes and talks to you, then like blow that guy off. Now you never blow anybody off, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I mean that's the scenario. A lot of times you have people coming up, and that's sort of why I paint this picture. It's not even your boss usually. It's like your boss's boss, your boss's boss, and it's like you by the time it should have got to you, you have like I remember there was a the CTO just came up to my desk, asked me to do something, and it's like if I recounted back how many people he jumped over like a scrum master, a business analyst, a dev manager, a director, and like bro, there's like 4 tiers that we just jumped over. Uh, but that will happen. And sometimes it happens. I would say at medium. I think like medium and small size companies are like and some people, this will be a very disagreeable statement for some people, but to me, my experience is the medium to small size companies are the worst companies to work for, because the small ones are like there's not really, you're not going to have any dev support staff to put those blockers up a lot of times, and the medium ones used to be small ones, and they're used to just sort of having their hands in everything. And so it's a little bit harder when you don't have those sort of available blockers there for you.
Yeah, you have to have smaller the organization, everybody's on deck to do everything. You might even have your developers like taking phone calls or doing support tickets, and you don't have a support staff. So I remember I worked for a really small organization, and they did we went to these people's homes and we installed automation systems like home security, HVAC. We made sure that they could control their TVs and media centers with touchscreens. And I was talking to clients when I was on premises. I was doing the helping a little bit with the installation, and then spending most of my time programming. And the worst thing is, you also have, you probably have this at some of the jobs you've had too, Dylan. Is sometimes they have to track every single hour that you work so they can bill the client, and then of course the clients don't want to be billed for everything, so they argue, and that way usually companies get pretty good at like documenting exactly what you're doing. So if you are in a organization that's kind of disorganized, like I've been in at times, like projects aren't really estimated out right, and then we're doing road, like in that case we call it road code. We would actually go to the customer site and then we would finish the programming on site, which is kind of a bad practice if you think about it. And then we have to track that time, but then we take lunches, so we can't obviously bill for the lunches. And then if our project manager or some guy comes and talks to us, like we have this meeting for a half hour with them, then we can't bill for that. And so it becomes kind of a mess when you're coming at the end of the week or the month when you have to turn in your timesheets and exactly what you've done. Just kind of a quick tangent on that.
Yeah, and to your earlier point about sort of having your all hands on deck at these smaller and medium sized companies. I remember I was working at a marketing company that did they had conferences every quarter, and for some of them they would have you'd rush real quick to get whatever you're working on done by so they can make the announcement at the conference and tell everybody how excited they are and all that. And then they would have some of the development staff just go and like be a cashier at the conference because you finish your task. And like I always thought it was kind of weird, but that's sort of the mentality a lot of times where you have everyone doing a little bit of everything. And I know nowadays I would say no. I guess as a senior dev, I would say no, nah, I'm not going to do that. But as a junior dev, I felt obligated to do a lot of these things. But that's sort of how it goes sometimes at these smaller companies.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know, like, oh, am I, I'm a junior dev, but I'm also, doing customer demos and I'm talking to the customers, I'm working the booth and cleaning up things and going to conferences. Like, wow, that's not typically what a dev does every day to day. And you're not going to be quite as productive when you're doing all this stuff. And pushing back is good. I'm still learning how to push back.
Yeah, it's not the hardest thing, and or not the easiest thing rather, and it's a bit of a skill not only to push back but to push back in such a way that you don't upset who you're pushing back against. And like I mean, and this isn't just nowadays we're talking about things that aren't isn't just for junior devs, but it's really just an industry thing where I remember I was in a call 2 weeks ago, and we were debugging something, and we had to install a new package and do all this configuration. And after we talked with DevOps and whatnot, and then one of our bosses is like, "How long is it going to take?" I mean, to get this installed that we just found the name of 10 minutes ago, I was like, "Dog, let me let me get back to you." This is going to happen quite frequently where people want timelines because businesses run off dates, unfortunately, and I don't see that us getting away from that anytime soon, no matter how much we try.
I know you just talked to some junior devs recently. Can you explain that experience and what other questions have they been having and things that we should watch out for?
Yeah, so I gave a I'm always happy to do like mentoring and stuff like that, and so Lambda school coding boot camp does this thing called Inspire Talks, and I was like, sure, I'll do one, and I sat for about 45 minutes. I did a video call with for about 45 minutes with about 50 live people, and it's recorded somewhere. And if I get the recording, maybe we'll share it in the link here because it's definitely relevant. And one of the comments that I got is always about money. So there's always the XYZ money stuff, and at year one, how much did you make? At year two, and I think we've already covered all that in separate stuff. But people are generally very concerned about what to get by salary history, like for year one, year two, year three, year four.
I think you should
And
talk about that. Like, just real briefly mention it because just in case someone missed the last episodes.
yeah. So we can. So disclaimer that this is going to vary by your area, right? So let's throw out the super high expensive areas, right? We're not talking about Southern California or New York, but maybe more mid-sized to smaller tech hubs. Let's take Tampa, where I'm at, or let's take Vegas or Denver or even Salt Lake. So some larger to mid-sized ones, and it's going to development's a strange thing because you can the salaries vary so differently. But I'll give you my salary. I've been a developer for about 4 years now, and the very first job that I got paid 62,000 for a base salary. That went up to 67,000, and this is in the Tampa, Florida area. 67,000 at 3 months because I decided to take a pay increase instead of relocation. At year two, by the end of year two, I had jumped a job about 1 year into that first job, not necessarily for money, but to go and work at a better dev shop, which is another thing to know that sort of in the same vein as money is that at that time I turned down 90,000 for the 75 I got because I thought that I'd be making six figures if I went to this other tech lead that I could tell was going to provide me a little bit more direction and was very knowledgeable. So by year one, end of year one, I was at 75. End of year two, I was at 105, and then I went to year 3. I went to 110. Year 4, I'm in year 4. I'm at 115, but my bonuses and benefits increased by about 20 to 30,000, and that's something that you'll sort of that sort of changes from a junior dev perspective when you're looking for salary and job jumps. You're oftentimes looking for mentorship, career growth, and pay increases. I would say by the time you're a senior dev, what you're looking for is better benefits if you haven't got them already, and then really to find a place that you could see yourself, see that career growth happening, and a place that you enjoy working at, which is kind of strange to say because like oftentimes you're like, because there's not much room for you to grow. So like you might want a more laid back environment. Might want remote. You might see that, oh yeah, there's a bunch of technical roles for ways for a senior dev to grow, because you can oftentimes feel stuck. So your objective for job hopping and salary changes as you progress, because you sort of hit this glass ceiling, and $10,000 or $15,000 more when you're already making 115, 130 isn't all that much after taxes.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would say too that if you're listening right now and you've been working for 5, 6, 7 years and you're not making over 100,000, I would say Dylan's kind of the exception to the rule. I think most developers, unless they're really trying to job hop, strategic with their career, going to more expensive places, or going to a FANG type job, which is like Facebook or Google, are probably not going to hit six figures in the first couple of years, or at least 3 years like Dylan did. It usually takes 5-10 years in like a medium cost of living area with a few raises and maybe a couple of job hops to make it. But if you're strategic and you know that there's a couple of really paying places in town, yeah, you could probably hit that, but you have to be really smart with your decisions like Dylan was.
Yeah, and to that same thing, the best way to increase your salary is just with a counter offer, in my opinion. You have the chance of staying at the place if you currently like it. Although I did that and I regretted it later on, um, because oftentimes if you're not just looking to leave for money. You're looking to leave for money and some reasons that aren't going to get addressed usually. So keep that in mind, and then you can always use that counteroffer to renegotiate something higher at your current workplace, or future one.
And it's also pretty typical if you don't do the job hopping to get the best raises to be at an organization that starts you at $50,000-$60,000 for a junior dev role, and even lower, honestly. A lot of places probably pay junior devs like 40,000, 45,000, especially if you're just in a small web development company that doesn't make a ton of money. Then it's pretty common if you do stay at one of those places that you're only going to get your 2 to 5% increases every year. And sometimes if we have bad years like we had in 2007, 2008, 2009, when the recession hit, you may not even get any raises. In fact, a lot of developers lost their job back then. Everybody's knocking on wood right now that another recession isn't around the corner, and we're not going to have a big layoff like we had back then. But you are going to slowly move up the chain, and you could be a senior dev at a place that pays you 80,000 or 75,000, but you're technically a senior dev and you've been there for like 6 years. I'm saying this from experience because that's what happened to me. For a little while I was, I guess you could call it a little bit underpaid. I had been in a place for many years, and my salary was not near what it probably should have been, and it took me a long time to think of like, maybe I should start looking for other opportunities.
Yeah, and that sort of reminds me of that not all junior dev struggles are actually going to come from the workplace. Many people, when they start their junior dev roles, are going to go from making, the average person I would say is a college grad, a boot camp grad, or somebody who's going from a job into a career, right? You're usually not going from a lawyer to, or a nurse to, dev. You're going from student to dev, would I'd say, in some form or fashion. So you might go from making $10 or $15 an hour to making $30 an hour, with a lot more increases to come, or $25 an hour, whatever it is. And you can get yourself in a lot of trouble financially and start shooting yourself in the foot. Chris Hawks has this statement where he's I've heard him say it quite a few times in his videos where he says we may be in the golden age of software development, and you need to plan for it as if we are, meaning, salaries are high, job growth is great, but we need to make sure that as our don't always expect your pay to increase and don't always expect to be paid well. So you want to keep your cost of living low and you want to save what you can, save as much as you can. And, not to say not to enjoy yourself, but don't go and after you get that, first pay increase or multiple pay increases, hopefully, start spending that money like they're going to keep coming because it may not.
It's good advice.
Okay, so another great question that I got, and I'm interested on your take on this. Is I have my own on here, but for those starting out in the industry, is it a depth or breadth that really helps with landing that first role and job hopping from there on?
That's an interesting question. I've definitely heard both. I've heard of some people say, well, you need to have a breadth or a depth of knowledge. Like you should become the best person ever at React. Like you should deep dive into React and maybe even deep dive into like React Router. So that way you can get that specialized job that pays a lot more. On the other hand, I've heard of, and I understand that point of view. Like for example, people rag on Ember.js. In fact, I just saw a thread the other day, people saying that they didn't like Angular 2 because they don't like TypeScript and they think it's too hard. But I'm thinking, if you see a lot of people saying like, I don't want to do Angular, I don't want to do Ember, you could think in the back of your head, there's probably not a ton of people that know how to write good quality Angular apps. There's probably not a ton of people that know how to write good quality Ember apps. Maybe that's an opportunity in the marketplace for me to do. And so that means it's going to be harder to find a job doing Ember development or Angular, Angular, I would say is more common, but it's going to be harder to find one of these niche technologies like Phoenix. Like, for example, you're learning Erlang or Elixir. But I bet those jobs pay a lot more if you can specialize and be really good at it. So that's kind of one thought process. However, when you're a junior dev, you almost are just trying to just get your foot in the door somewhere. And I'm talking to the people that probably either graduated from boot camp or self-taught. Even with CS degree, it can be hard getting that first job. So if you have, it's hard to niche down and specialize in something if you don't have any general experience. Like it's okay if you've been in the industry for 2 or 3 years, then to niche down into some topic or something that you really interests you that there's not a whole lot of competition for. But when you're just trying to get your foot in the door the first time, I'd almost recommend to look for that breadth of knowledge. Make sure you know the basics of like version control and can, if you're wanting to be web development, that you understand how to do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all the basics. And that way you can land somewhere that maybe it's a job doing PHP and WordPress. Maybe that's okay. Just to get your foot in the door somewhere so that way you can start building up some experience. And then once you have a little bit of experience, then specialize into something really niche that you think you're really interested in. Like today, I'd also say one of the niche topics everybody's getting into is data science. That's a little bit harder to do if you don't have a degree, but data science is big, like AI, stuff like that. You might want to look at or specializing in one of these programming languages or frameworks that aren't as popular. I don't know. What do you think, Dylan?
Yeah, so I this is one of those questions where I think the question is flawed. So I think the real question is understanding what's important and what's not. And you you know when you look at these job apps nowadays, they're typically passed from one manager one time and then forgotten about, and recruiters make minor changes here or there and they're handled by typically non technical people. And so being able to understand what is worth learning versus what is not. Like I'll give you an example that I get asked about, should I spend the time to learn Webpack inside and out? No, you shouldn't. I can't imagine there's an organization that's going to you to memorize Webpack config and be like, oh great, this is our guy, right? Like you want to learn the things that matter, the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe even the framework associated with it, the fundamentals, because these sort of build tools, these packages, all these sorts of things, they come and they go. And being able to see what's actually required and what's important will lend you to see what you need to be familiar with, and then you'll sort of figure out how deep you need to know the things that are important, and how what are the things that are requirements and what are the things that are preferred and what are the things that don't matter. Like every time I've gotten asked a couple times how many years of Jira experience I get, and I laugh every time. Like it's just like, what if it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. You sound silly, Mr. or Mrs. Recruiter. But really understanding what is worth your time and energy, I think, is where the question should be.
So, do you not think that it's okay to specialize in something? Like, for example, Dylan, I know you are really, really good at TypeScript and really good at Angular, and you've been doing conference talks and everything on that. So, I think that's a specialization for you. So, if you had ever wanted to, heaven forbid something happened and you need to get another job, I bet you could find a company that really enjoys TypeScript and Angular, which I believe Angular is not the most popular JavaScript framework. We all know that it's React. So that is a highly more specialized job. There's probably less developers out there that know as much as you in TypeScript and Java and Angular. So wouldn't that be kind of a good in for you and good way for you to specialize even more in?
Yeah, and I would evaluate at the time, and this is from a senior dev perspective. I evaluate at the time if I'd want to transition. Right, it may be, hey, I'm just going to take the first thing that matches my skill set because that'll be easiest. But maybe I'd be worried that down the road I may need to change some frameworks and things like that. But from a junior dev perspective, I generally think that you shouldn't specialize because I mean, it is true that you only need one job to get started, but I would like to open the pool up to as many job possibilities as is uh, feasible. Which sort of, I guess, to answer the question, really leans me towards that breadth, but making sure that it's on the important items and on the important requirements.
That's a good point. Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think at first I agree with the point of trying to understand what the question is, and I agree with generally being more breadth at least at first, and then maybe specialize. I wonder if there is some company out there that's like Webpack. I need a Webpack specialist to come in, and it's a full time job, and all he does is configure Webpack for all these different projects, and we need to do these crazy things. And at that point, they're probably looking for someone like a core contributor to Webpack. By the way, if you're listening right now and you want to specialize, become a core contributor, or not even a core contributor, but a leading contributor to an open source project that you admire or want that's somewhat popular. That will boost you up in the ranks of jobs that use that technology. If you're like, hey, I'm a core maintainer of this project.
Yeah, don't do what I do, which is I just make feature requests. That's all I do in the issues. Feature requests, add this, and then they say, well, why don't you build as and then I just lurk. I never respond back. Don't do that. That ain't gonna help.
Yeah, that's the favorite thing of open source contributors is that anytime you get a feature request, you can be like, you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like completely off the wall, but that's another topic.
Yeah. All right. Was there any other diss struggle that we needed to cover? I mean, there's a ton. We could be here for 5 days and talk about the hardships of the junior dev lives, senior dev life, and architect life, and just corporate America life, I guess.
I know one struggle that we've touched on a few times in past episodes is that depending on the job you're looking for, that being able to pass interviews is a difficult process, and that's definitely a struggle for junior devs, and that there's no real answer to that conundrum. If you're using whiteboarding interviews, you're going to have to grind leak code and other places where you can learn algorithms. If you are doing junior dev positions for web development, you're probably going to get a take-home projects. You're going to have to learn how to do those. You might have to do coding tests online are now becoming more and more popular. I think that's a big struggle, just getting through the interview process and then how you learn from it. But I
Yeah,
mean,
that
just we've talked about it in our rejection episode, but it's still a real thing. I think we could probably do an episode on algorithms and interview advice too. I think we've kind of touched around it, danced around it, but not directly talked about it.
yeah, we're gonna go deep into the interview. That's a that's an excellent point. And it's also one of the more hated aspects of being a developer. And I wish I had more insight into other industries interviewing, because my gut tells me that the interview process for developers is significantly harder than other industries, but I don't know that to be true. Um, it just seems like such a like the few people I've talked to in other fields, they're like, yeah, I go in, I meet some people, I leave, I go in one more time, and then I meet their boss, and then I'm hired. I'm like, dude, I'd kill for that interview. Like my interview's never like that. Um,
And it feels like more junior. It depends on. I guess it depends on the company. Some companies will take it easy on juniors, but I've seen the opposite too, where junior devs are run through the gauntlet, meaning either 4-hour interviews or 8-hour interviews. So usually like a phone screening that can be 20 minutes long where they ask you some behavioral questions, then a technical phone screening which could be 20 or 30 minutes where they just quiz you on technical topics that you may or may not know. And then if you pass the gauntlet between those two, then you get the on-site interview, which could be anywhere between a couple hours to a lot of times full day interviews, which you're meeting multiple teams. There could be multiple rounds of whiteboarding. There could be a computer test somewhere in the middle where you have to finish that. And then if you're even especially unlucky, you might have to meet with HR to have like a behavioral type test and then maybe pair programming at the end of the day. And this has become the normal for especially more for software development jobs in general, I guess.
yeah, and then you got to sacrifice a goat in 2020. That's at the end to really show that you're committed. Um, Now, here's something I found somewhat interesting. I wonder if this line's the same for you. But as I've progressed in my career, my interviews have actually gotten easier. And it's not easier as in I've become a better developer, although that is definitely true. They just seem that the senior level roles seem to be an easier interview process than when I was going for junior level roles and I was getting started.
It's I have had some easier and then some just even harder. I had one with I probably shouldn't name names. I had one with a big phone type company a few years ago where it was 30 minutes on the phone, behavioral question, then another 30 minutes, um, a technical, and then a 30-minute, actually, it was an hour long screen share with the manager of the department. And I had to create a game where I was like a snake type game where you had to move things around, and it was all done in jQuery. And then the next process, which I didn't pass that, I guess they made it progressively harder too. There was like 5 parts, and the first 2 parts were like, can you get a cursor or can you get this avatar, this picture on the screen? Can you move the avatar around? And third was like, could you eat the apples to make the avatar look bigger? And then there was like even a harder part. It was like number 4, can you implement this part of it in 5? And then I didn't pass it. And and if I would have passed that, I would have gone to a on-site interview, which was just like I was explaining before, with multiple rounds of interviews with different teams and whiteboarding and computer test, and then an architecture test. That's one thing I've noticed more with senior developer roles. They want to ask you about architecture. Like, okay, can you tell me how would you design this system? Like, what back-end systems would you use? What front-end systems would you use? What databases would you use? And then map it all out. So that's what I've seen, especially with bigger companies. And then occasionally you'll get a company that is like, hey, I've seen your resume. I've seen what you've done in the past. We're going to kind of just ask you a few, I don't know, softball questions, maybe ask you a few technical questions, and then we'll make you an offer. But it feels like I'm still getting a lot, although I'm not interviewing right now. When I was trying to move jobs, I was still getting a lot of the huge technical long interviews. So I guess my experience isn't quite like that.
It might also be that with those interviews that have been coming my way that are similar to what you described, I typically, if they'll be like, "This is the interview process," I'll ask for about $15,000 to $20,000 more than I would ask for an easier interview process, because it's like I'm gonna go through an Olympic job interview right now. Like it's just a exceptional job interview that it has to be financially worth it. Like the payoff, like I can't go through all that to get it equally paying or $5,000 more. I need a solid 10-20K raise here to even make it worth the effort that's in there. And oftentimes that might scare them away if I'm pushing the higher price range. But it's I don't know. I can't imagine going, like, say you went through that interview process, you nailed it, you studied, put all this time in, and then they hit you with something that paid like 5 or 10 grand less than your previous job or your current job. You're like, dude, is this how you get people? This is how you get people? You get them to invest all this time and energy, and then you lowball them. But maybe that's a strategy, man. I don't know. These HR people are crafty nowadays.
And you always get the recruiter. Some recruiters, if you get a good recruiter, they'll ask you for your, and this is kind of a crafty question, and some people say you shouldn't answer it. They ask you how much you're making now and then what your expected salary is. So if you answer what you're making now, that kind of puts a level to whether they know how much to pay you, how much they can offer you. So if you say you're making, I don't know, $100,000, they'd probably be like, oh, I can offer them $120,000, and they'll be okay. But if you like give them a range, like I make $100,000 to $140,000, then that's a little bit better. Or if you say nothing, like, I'm sorry, I don't disclose how much I make, then that's like the best, and they can't lowball you. But there's a lot of strategies when you get to that point.
Yeah, now we're sort of getting off tangent, and we could do a whole episode on recruiters, and maybe we should.
Yeah,
make sure you don't fall for any of these lies. So, like, not to go too deep, but recruiters are sort of salespeople. Like the ones at companies I trust a little bit more, but the ones that are like external agencies, not so much. Like I had one that messaged me the other day, pay $150K for a dev. So that's pretty good, man. Let me, what's this company? And he told me, and then like I went on Glassdoor, and the number one thing I saw for development was underpaid. I was like, you ain't paying $150K, you liar. But anyhow, so the struggle, as the kids say, is real for the junior devs, and sometimes it gets a little easier, but sometimes not. But life is good at the end of the day for developers.
For sure.
I'll leave it at that. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at eric.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members, and you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.